Today, I'll show you all my tips and tricks to get amazing intricate cuts every time with your Cricut machine. I bet you have seen beautiful wedding invitations or stunning lace-like paper ornaments on social media. They are indeed gorgeous, but also very daunting when it comes to achieving the perfect cut. Many times I have seen posts of cutting machine users blaming their machines for the poor results. But there are many factors involved when cutting these complex designs, and today I'll share with you all my tips and tricks to get flawless, intricate cuts each time with your Cricut machine. Hi guys, my name is Omar, and today I will show you what to do and what to avoid when cutting beautiful, elaborate designs with your cutting machine. I will be talking about 4 main aspects that you should take into account, and these are your machine, accessories, and tools, the paper you use, the design of the actual SVG file, and how to refine the final piece. I own a Cricut Maker now, but I have used the same procedures in the past on a Cricut Explorer and they worked just as fine. By the way, the invitation SVG file used in this tutorial can be found at my blog at www.awesomesvgs.com, so head over there and download it for free. Here we go. Everything regarding your cutting machine. First, the blade. You may not believe it, but in the past I have used the same blade for years cutting many paper projects without having to switch it for a new one. Since I cut mostly paper, which is what we are focusing on this video, I won't be referring to vinyl or other materials. Think of your blades as your fabric scissors. Like my mom said, you don't use fabric scissors for paper or plastic. That said, I would suggest you to use a different blade for paper or fabric or from foam or vinyl, etc. Keep your blades separated and labeled so you don't accidentally use your vinyl blade on paper or the other way around. Vinyl especially is very tricky because it has some kind of adhesive in the backing layer, and that may prevent you from getting a clean cut on paper later. Spray-on stabilizer used on fabric may also make your blade do strange things on paper, so try not to use your blade on these materials and on paper also. As to this day, Cricut has 2 different types of blades for cutting paper, the fine point blade and the deep point blade. The cutting angle of both blades is very similar, and the only difference I have found between them is the width of the blade. The deep point blade, I believe, is 0.6 millimeters wider than the fine point blade, which gives it a longer sharp edge, thus making it able to cut thicker materials. I have not found any difference when cutting cardstock using either blade, and for the most part I use the standard fine point blade and the standard housing also when cutting materials from 18-pound paper up to 110-pound cardstock. By the way, the fine point blade housing is the silver one that comes with your machine. Make sure to clean your blade after and sometimes during an intricate cut, as some small pieces of paper may get stuck on the blade's tip, making it difficult to achieve a clean cut. A piece of lint-free cloth or gauze and some rubbing alcohol are good for cleaning your blades. Second, the mat. New mats are a delight, but they also make it very difficult to remove designs from them. I always run a towel or a t-shirt a couple of times to remove a bit of the adhesive when using new mats or refurbished mats, so the design doesn't rip when I take it off the mat. Make sure the mat is flat and not warped. Always store your mats flat and keep the protective film when not using them to avoid getting dust on them. You need a good grip mat to make sure the material doesn't shift during the cut. There's no need for a new mat though, and you could wash your mats, or you might even re-stick your mats using a method I described on a previous video that you can check out on the link being displayed. Always remove any residual paper from your mat when finishing a project and putting your mat away. A light grip or a regular grip mat are good for intricate cuts. Strong grip mats are not a good idea to use because they make harder to remove the projects from them and the project may tear or rip in the process. Regarding alternative brand mats, I have used a few and have not found many differences, although you might need to adjust your settings when they are thicker or thinner than Cricut brand mats. I would suggest to keep a mat only for intricate cuts and changing them often. Cutting other materials and doing intricate cuts often may create deep grooves or cut lines that may affect your end result. A mesh of visible lines on your mat is a good sign to change it and maybe leave it for cutting simpler designs. Remember to use all the mat and rotate or move your design to make sure you cut on all of the surface. That will prolong the life of your mat. Third, your machine settings. The best setting to get good results varies greatly from material to material, and I have also found that it's different from machine to machine. So you might need to create a custom new setting for intricate cuts for each paper type and thickness you intend to cut, and also for each of your machines. There is a new video on the channel that explains how to create custom settings, but you can also find plenty of information on the Cricut site. Anyways, my settings are: for 65-pound cardstock, I use a pressure of 210 with 2 passes and a fine point blade. For the 80-pound cardstock, I use a pressure of 280 with 2 passes also and the fine point blade. And for 110-pound cardstock, I use a pressure of 310 with 2 passes and the fine point blade. Now for intricate cuts, and depending on the thickness and the hardness of your paper, I will talk more on this later, I always like to do a 2-pass cut. Even if you have tried your settings several times, always check your cuts before ejecting the mat from the machine once it finishes cutting the design. If there are areas that are not cut all the way through, hit the go button again on your machine to do another pass or 2 maybe. I have found that using the highest pressure does not always render the best result, and it is better to create a 2-pass setting rather than going bananas on the pressure once for thicker materials. I consider thicker materials cardstock from 80 pounds and up. Like I said before, not all cutting mats are the same. Alternative brands can be thinner or thicker, and there are also differences between Cricut brand mats. A digital gauge is a good tool to have to determine whether you need to change pressure settings on your machine. Most of the time, changing pressure before cutting is enough instead of modifying the setting altogether. This option is available once you choose your material, and you can add more or apply less pressure to your custom setting right there on the project preview screen and design space. Number 4, other tools. A brayer. A brayer is a small hand roller often used in printmaking to thinly apply ink or paint onto a printing surface. They are made of different materials, but for cutting paper purposes, a rubber one is preferred. In our case, the tool is used to evenly smooth the paper on the mat and allowing it to adhere completely to the adhesive underneath, eliminating the possibility of air pockets that may cause the paper to tear when present. Slide the brayer with soft and even pressure, making sure to cover the whole paper surface. Avoid passing it directly over the mat, as it might lift some of the adhesive, and then transfer it to the paper surface. Tape. I always use small pieces of washi tape to secure the paper onto the mat. A piece on 2 of the corners, preferably attached to the non-sticky surface of the mat to prevent the tape from removing the mat adhesive. Low-tack tape or masking tape can also be used. Cricut Scraper and Scraper XL. These are not only great for removing bits and pieces of cardstock from your mat, but can also be used instead of a brayer to smooth out the paper on the mat. Be aware that pressing too hard may scratch and score the cardstock, so use it very carefully. Scoring tool. This is one of the most important steps. It all has to do with the way the scoring tool presses the cardstock against the mat, packing the paper pulp together and allowing the blade to glide smoothly. I've used the scoring tool on the Maker and the Explorer with similar results. The debossing tool or the medium foiling tool point are also a good choice for the maker. I would not recommend the scoring wheel, though, as it takes very long to score intricate design and is not as precise as the scoring tool. You need to prepare the project before cutting it if you intend to use the scoring tool. First, create a copy of the cutting lines layer and make sure both copies are aligned using the Align button on the Tools panel and selecting the Center option. Then, change the operation of this newly created layer from Basic Cut to Score, Foil Medium, or Deboss depending on the tool you will be using. Finally, attach both the cutting lines and the scoring lines together. And to do this, select both layers on the Layers panel or click and drag a rectangle over both layers and then click on Attach. That way, both operations will be performed on the same mat. Now, I will talk a little bit about the paper. Paper is made by breaking down wood or other vegetable fibers into a pulp, which is then spread out, dried, and pressed into sheets. We will talk about the quality, the weight, the type, and the storage of the paper. For complex designs, high-quality paper is a must. For this purpose, quality is defined by how much the pulp is ground and how much pressure is applied to create the sheets during manufacturing. Temperature is also important when drying and pressing the sheets, being those heat-pressed more compact and better for these challenging projects. I love any paper from the Nina collection and also the American Crafts texture cardstock. They both cut beautifully and the solid colored core hides any imperfection. Stay away from craft or recycled paper as they have larger pulp particles that tend to rip when cut. Now let's talk a little bit about the weight of the paper. To indicate the weight or thickness of the paper, pounds and a GSM, which means grams per square meter, are the units of measurement used. Pounds refers to the weight of 500 sheets of paper in a standard size, whereas GSM refers to the weight of 1 square meter of paper. The higher the pound weight and the GSM, the thicker and heavier the paper will be. It's important to note that paper weight does not necessarily correlate with paper quality. For the most used cardstock weight, a good reference is to multiply pounds times 2.7. So a 65-pound cover cardstock is close to 180 grams per square meter paper. 80 pounds is equals to 210 grams per square meter, and 110 pounds equals 300 grams per square meter. Please note that these references are approximate, and in the end, it really comes down to the many aspects of the manufacturing process. It is important to know that for the most part, thicker and heavier paper needs higher cutting pressure and probably more blade passes of your machine. I usually work with a 65-pound cardstock, but also use 80-pound cardstock for intricate thin line designs like faux vitraux or lace-like designs. I would not recommend a 110-pound cardstock for intricate cuts, as they need more blade passes, increasing the risk of rips and tears, and instead try using 2 or more sheets of a lower weight paper to achieve the desired thickness of your project. It's also a good idea to create a cheat sheet with your experience cutting different paper thicknesses and the pressure and number of blade passes needed to have a starting point when you try cutting new materials. Type of paper. Cardstock is classified depending on surface texture, uses, manufacturing process, type of material used, etc. For the purposes of this video, I will divide them into 2 categories: regular and specialty cardstock. Regular cardstock, also known as standard cardstock or plain cardstock, is a versatile and commonly used type of heavy paper. It has a smooth surface and usually comes in a white or off-white color. Nina's Solar White and 65-pound cardstock is my favorite one. Specialty cardstock is a special kind of paper that is created, coated, or textured for a specific use. It is high-end, fine paper that can be used for invitations, stationery, packaging, paper crafting, and more. This is usually the paper that delivers the best intricate cuts. I especially love the Creative Collection from Nina and all their varieties, and I also like American Crafts texture cardstock and die cuts with a view. Their glitter paper is the best to me. When storing the paper, some people prefer to store paper flat, but I have found no difference in storing it vertical as long as it is protected from bending or scratching too much. I use IKEA magazine file organizers for all my letter, office, and A4 size paper, and I use a letter tray also from IKEA that I placed vertically for all my 12 by 12 inches paper pads. Now, regarding the SVG file, not all files are created equal. High quality files allow for the best result, and you should consider two aspects: sharp corners and thickness of the final design. Round corners. Every time the blade touches the paper, creates an indent on the paper. Then, to create a line, it starts ripping apart the fibers of the paper. Every time the blade finds a corner, it turns inside the housing and it compacts the fibers of the paper together. On the closed side of the corner, the blade pushes the fibers in, and on the outer side, it pushes them out. The sharper the angle, the more pressure the blade applies to both sides. The thicker the paper, the more fibers are pushed apart, and for some papers, this creates so much tension that when the blade starts cutting a line again, it may drag some of this pushed fibers, not being able to cut all the way through, and it starts ripping the paper. A high quality design has small rounded corners instead of sharp points. They look sharp in the final design, but have enough of a curve for the blade to smoothly make the turn, compacting the fibers evenly and avoiding ripping the paper. Zoom in close on your design corners and make sure those sharp corners meet the criteria for an intricate cut. Otherwise, consider changing to a lighter or a higher quality cardstock. Now for the line thickness, high quality papers allow for thinner lines in the final design. I would suggest though not to go lower than 1 mm thick, which is about 0.04 inches. This is important when uploading a file and scaling it down on your canvas. An easy way to check the final thickness of a project is to add a basic square shape to your canvas, resize it to 1 by 1 mm or 0.04 inches by 0.04 inches, and check the design by overlapping this square. If there's a piece that's smaller than that, make sure you make the project larger or try switching to a different design. Now, when removing your project from the mat, always keep in mind that intricate designs are very delicate, and due to the method explained earlier, the cardstock is firmly pressed against the mat adhesive. Because of the brayer and the scoring tools, it's very hard to remove the project from the mat just by lifting it. A method I use to avoid ripping the paper and the project is always bend the mat slightly and pull the design away diagonally. This ensures the cardstock stays in one piece and also that it doesn't curl. Keep bending the mat closer to the attached part of the design and pulling the cardstock also close to the stuck areas. Do not bend the mat too much or it might break. I rarely use spatulas or scrapers to remove my cuts from the mat, but I do use them to remove all the bits and pieces that stay behind. To store your cuts, keep them flat inside a book, a paper stack, or between two pieces of heavy cardstock until you use them. Now the last step is refining the cuts. I developed a method to get rid of all the lifted edges and points inherent to all cutting machine blades. These points will always be present due to the nature of the process. This is just an extra step to achieve perfection. You will need an embossing machine and a rubber embossing mat. When die cutting, these rubber mats allow you to use dies as embossing tools. Instead of applying pressure for the die to cut through the paper, they reduce the pressure to obtain an embossed image or pattern. Now you will need to make the correct plate sandwich depending on your machine. Here I am using a Cricut Cuttlebug that I believe is discontinued as to this day, but you can use a Gemini, a Big Shot, or whatever you have at hand that has a rubber mat add-on. The important thing is to place your cut paper first, right side facing the hard plate, and run it through your machine. Then turn it over and run it again with the right side facing the rubber mat. This will flatten all the jagged edges, nooks, and crannies your final piece might have. Now my final advice is to be patient and don't be discouraged if things don't go the way you expect at first. You have an amazing piece of machinery, and usually it's other factors that play into a poorly cut design. Experiment with different brands of paper and keep in mind that a same brand may not be consistent with their quality every time. Also, it's a good idea to keep a record of your findings. I have a list of my go-to papers and settings when cutting these detailed projects. For the most part, like I said before, I use Neenah Creative Collection paper and 65 and 80 pound cardstock on almost all my intricate cuts. I rarely use 110 pound cardstock, and instead I stack 2 or more layers of a lighter cardstock when wanting a thicker design. Here is a troubleshooting list of things to check when having difficulties with your projects. Try to follow it sequentially, as it will give you a better understanding of what's wrong. You can download this note card at my blog, and the link is in the video description below. I hope this information was useful to you and that you're able to tackle those difficult designs every time. Now here are a couple more videos that might interest you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.